Okay, folks, we might get started. I'm sure there'll be a few more coming in as we get the presentation, the webinar underway. But good evening. Thanks for joining us to sort of understand a little bit more about what Taylor does in terms of your moving your career around the world. My name is Hayden Gordine, and I head up Taylor Roots. I've worked in our London, Singapore, Hong Kong, and now Sydney offices. Having worked in these international offices and lived overseas for almost 17 years now, I've got a very good understanding of what it's like to work and live internationally. But most importantly, I've actually sat in your very shoes. Although I'm not an Australian, I was in New Zealand many, many years ago as a lawyer and embarked on what us Kiwis call our overseas experience after a very similar presentation by Taylor Root. At the time I departed New Zealand, I was a 3-year PQE corporate lawyer, had a little bit of M&A experience, a lot of commercial experience, but I packed up my backpack and went traveling around Southeast Asia for 3 months, Thailand and Vietnam, etc. Before I landed in London, and Taylor Root got me a job with a city law firm called Charles Russell Speechley. I then moved on to a US law firm called King & Spalding and focused on private equity and mergers and acquisitions. But enough about me. I want to introduce my colleague here, Samantha Jones.
Thanks, Hayden, and hi, everyone. By way of background, I work in our private practice team at Taylor Root. Prior to joining Taylor Root, I worked as a real estate lawyer for about 3 years, and I now specialise in placing lawyers domestically within Australia, but also overseas, with a particular focus on London and New York markets. But for the purposes of today, I'll chat to you about the US market.
Thanks, Sam. One of the big issues with moving overseas is really the lack of certainty. Most of that uncertainty centers around, moving overseas without a job, with a job, but there's a lot of uncertainties when you arrive as well. Where do I get a flat? Who am I going to live with? What suburb am I going to live in? And you're doing all this without family and friends close by. So look, unfortunately, there are so many unknowns of making a move overseas, but we hope today to give you some groundwork in terms of just general information and clarity about those overseas options. For many lawyers, the dream overseas is high salaries, travel, working and living in London or New York or San Francisco. But the UK and the US are not the only options, and we'll cover off of those in this evening's seminar. So as a summary, we will cover off London, New York, and San Francisco in greater detail, but we'll also touch on the offshore markets, the Middle East, and the Asian markets. If you've got any questions throughout the webinar, please do put them in the Q&A box, and we'll answer those at the end. I am going to share my screen again so you can kind of sort of see some information, some highlights as we go through, a bit more interesting than looking at us from that perspective. It's going to work. So I'm sure, look, most of you are familiar with Taylor Root. We pride ourselves on being local experts in the Australian market, but we're obviously physically present in all the major legal markets around the world, including London and New York. Look, we've been around for 30 odd years. We've moved a lot of lawyers in and out of Australia into the international markets. And I think one of the great things about it is we have people that are like me, previously worked around the world, but are ex-lawyers as your consultants, like Sam and myself, in terms of just giving you advice on that. As you can see, here's all our offices. We've got offices in London and Dublin. We've got in New York. We've got offices in Singapore and Hong Kong, and then obviously, the Middle East. What I really want to focus on before we kind of go on to talk about locations is really about demand, because I think that's a really interesting thing from your perspective to understand, the move and how the move works. When I talk about demand, it's still very much there at the moment for Aussie lawyers, but it's certainly not at the place where we're at in 2021 in the first half of last year. I'm really sorry to say that they were actually like boom years for kind of relocation. We're more to, I guess, a return to normality, but I wouldn't let that put you off, moving overseas. I think we've got 6 Australian lawyers interviewing this week alone in the UK. So to give you an idea of still the amount of opportunities that are going on there. International lawyers, international markets like Australian lawyers for 3 reasons. We are really well trained, we work hard, and we go home. Law firms will get the best out of you for 2 to 5 years. Just when they need to start talking to you about partnership opportunities, you pack up your bags and we move home. Now, in all honesty, all the law firms know that, and it's a win-win for both parties. That's essentially why there is so much demand for us, is because we work hard, we come in at associate level, and we go back home before we actually get into the partnership side of things. So don't sort of forget that why they're sort of looking for Australian lawyers. One of the biggest issues in that demand is that it does center around transactional practice groups. And that was particularly so in 2021-22, where the demand for private equity, banking, capital markets, funds lawyers was just absolutely insane. And look, traditionally, if you are a lawyer that has corporate or banking experience, there's a really high chance that you'll secure a role before you move Australia, and in many respects, probably multiple offers. Corporate, capital markets, funds, banking, construction, as I've sort of mentioned, there are the highest ones. There's still a lot of demand at the moment around sort of the IP, IT, TMT, competition, employment. Restructuring is kind of moving from moderate to demand to high demand as the world kind of changes a little bit from that sort of side of things. Particularly non-contentious construction restructuring is taking off a bit at the moment. There's some good roles at US law firms from that perspective. Real estate's probably going the other way. It's still moderate, but it's probably going more into the least demand side of things at the moment. Now, traditionally, where we have struggled with lawyers and the least demand category there are commercial litigators or contentious lawyers. Look, the reason for that is there's an oversupply of those lawyers internationally, and then Australian lawyers tend to lack international arbitration experience, which helps that sort of movement. But look, we've got other options for litigators in the offshore market. Or look, there's still great opportunities just getting over to London and getting a contract role and getting some of that UK experience. So definitely don't let it put you off. The other thing that goes hand in hand with this demand is and greatly affects demand is really your PQE. I just want to cover that off from a UK perspective, then we'll touch a little bit about the US. Obviously, the UK is a little bit more complex. For those that are not familiar with the UK system, lawyers complete a 2-year training contract. That's 4 seats of 6 months each, and one of those are a contentious seat. At the end of those 2 years, they're offered a qualified position in a practice group, which is known as being an NQ, so a newly qualified lawyer. Because Australian lawyers don't complete training contracts, we are traditionally discounted 2 years. Now, many of you may have completed a year as a grad lawyer rotation, and that all will help in sort of only ensuring that you discounted 1 year. Most firms apply the 2-year discount without a doubt, although some New York firms like Skadden only do one year. Look, what I have to admit, though, is that in the highs last year in 2021, the discounting just went completely out the window. So I'm sure you've got friends that have already left that are employed as 1, 2, 3 year PQEs, and they're exactly the same PQE as yourself. Unfortunately, the market has turned, and we're going back to more the traditional side of things. And we are hearing some real not horror stories, but difficult stories that are coming out of the UK in particular, where some of the junior Australian lawyers are struggling to perform at the level that they went in as, and as such, they've actually stayed behind as their cohort has gone to 2 years PQE. So the US and UK markets is definitely a more intense working environment. So what I always say to candidates is don't worry about the PQE that you go into. I know it has a direct effect on salary, but the salaries are pretty good because the law firms will readjust you after 6-12 months. They might just make you 1.5-year discount or only 1-year discount. So you're constantly readjusted to the level that you're performing with your cohort, and they will move you up and down. So look, as I sort of said, unfortunately, the religious discounting of PQE has returned to the market. And to make matters even worse, that demand has really shifted from that NQ 1-year PQE in UK terms to probably more that sort of 2 to 3-year PQE mark. A lot of the lawyers we have interviewing at the moment sort of have at least 3 to 4 years experience here, where 12 months or 18 months ago, you could have 6 months, 12 months experience and you're getting jobs. So that demand shifts constantly, and it only takes a little bit of a rightening of the market later on this year where that could move around, and hopefully those more junior roles are coming up. But if you're looking at a rule of thumb from the rules of thumb over the last 20 years is probably the best way of looking at it. You probably want to be doing about 3 years experience in Australia before you start looking at those markets. Sam's just going to sort of touch a little bit on the UK market from that perspective, US market.
Yes, so in the US, firms will usually apply a 1-year PQE discount, but there's no real hard and fast rule, and ultimately it depends on the partner's assessment of your, technical expertise and experience, really, relative to other people in the team. So really, it's an assessment that's made post the interview process. Thanks,
Sam. So we're just going to cover off the UK in the first part of this. You can walk into literally any law firm in London, any pub in London, and I guarantee you there will be an Aussie there. Traveling and working in the UK has been a rite of passage for us for generations. With close historical ties, there's no language barrier. There's a very similar legal system. You've got Europe on your doorstep. It's a real natural fit for Aussie lawyers looking to work abroad and accelerate their career and really travel the world. There's so many reasons why you want to go overseas and work, and it's not just all about big deals and big money. For me, one of the enjoyable parts was really living and working in London, and then also just the travel. I traveled all through Europe, Ireland, Scotland, France. I did boat trips around Croatia. I saw the pyramids. I saw the Blue Moss, went to Greece. That was a big part of it. It's one of the reasons why I really loved it. Then you've got London itself. It's got everything you can imagine. Big Ben, Buckingham Palace, the West End, the pubs, the history, the culture, the parks. What I would say about the parks is probably the most one that Aussies talk about the most when we get there, because there's obviously no beaches, but in the middle of summer, everyone goes down to the park and strips down to their bikinis and budgie smugglers and are all sitting there having beers and sunbathing, and there's not a bit of sand or a bit of water inside. So, that's a big new experience when you first move over there. Speaking of summer, it's not Sydney, it's not Brisbane, it's probably interchangeable, a bit like Melbourne, but without the extreme heats. But it's light to 10:30 at night, which is super cool. And you've also got to remember that the Mediterranean, is literally only an hour and a half the flight away. Look, winter's long, it's dark. I'm not going to lie. It's dark at about 3:30 p.m., which is a bit of a shock to the system, but it's really well catered for. And I'm from New Zealand and grew up. I reckon I was colder in New Zealand than I ever was in the UK. So the UK is really made up of a broad spectrum of firms, ranging from small and independent boutique firms through to some of the global firms, which you can see here. Typical law firm categories that you'll hear of is the US Elite, the Magic Circle, the Silver Circle, International, West End, Boutique, and Regional. US practices, I just want to cover off the US firms now. They form a big part of the London market. They've really gone through substantial growth in the last sort of 15 years. They've secured some heavyweight partners from the Magic Circle and have really grown their US practices and become some of the biggest UK firms. Now, they all tend to be corporate law firms, hence the recruitment of only transactional lawyers. They have large corporate capital markets, finance, and restructuring practices, but they don't tend to practice employment law or IT, for instance. So the US firms pay very well. It's life-changing money, but the trade-off is extremely well hours. Things like 300 billable hours, 3,000 billable hours, I should say, weekend work, and generally speaking, they're known for their lack of training. In saying that, some of the US elite firms such as Latham & Watkins now and Skadden now have excellent support and training practices. I just want to show you some of the salaries that are kind of on offer there now. And these are all in Australian dollars. The culture of US firms isn't for everyone. But if you want to work on the best deals with the best lawyers, then you want to work for a US law firm. They really are, the elite from that perspective. Then you sort of have the magic circle firms. I'm sure you're familiar with some of these sort of famous law firm names of London. So with the ones we have here, like A&O and Clifford Chance, Freshfields, Slaughter & May, and obviously Linklaters, which is an association with Allens. What sets these firms apart from the rest of the UK market is that they are big, they're based in London, and they have sizable international operations. They all take sort of about 100 NQs every year. So, big law firms, their reputation is working lawyers hard and demanding a lot of them. The work is still a bit like the US firms, heavily focused on corporate and finance. These departments, without doubt, stand at the heart of the firm, but they also have support and advisory function. So that's where your employment, your tax, your IP, and your IT come in. They also a big bulk of their litigation work is finance in nature too. So they're more of a full service firm, but with the heart of that work coming from their corporate and finance clients. When it comes to US versus Magic Circle, the number one difference, in my opinion, is money. In Australian dollars terms, the difference for a PQE, let's say a 3 PQE lawyer obtaining a 1-year PQE role, which we've kind of got highlighted here, can be as much as $100,000. You're likely to work the same long hours, so why not work for an extra $100,000 is what I would say. But in saying that, it's a very present debate, and it's one you'll hear a lot discussed in London. The reason why you shouldn't do it and give into that salary temptation, perhaps is the even longer hours in the magic circle, the billable targets of the US firms. Big one for me is, they're always on expectation, the more demanding and unrelenting partners. There's a lack of formal training. There's a huge emphasis on funds and private equity work rather than listed and private client work. So that's a big distinction between the US firms and the magic circle. If you like that listed work, you like that private client work, US firms are trying to go into the moment, but it's really the heart of that is in the magic circle firms. So yeah, money is undeniably the major driving force to move to a US law firm. From my perspective, as a Kiwi that worked for a US law firm, I think the hardest thing, in all honesty, was the always-on expectation. We were cancelling holidays when all my mates were at the airport and I was about to leave. We were cancelling holidays because we had deals. I worked every Sunday for 8 months. It was great money, but there really is a trade-off in terms of what you give up from a lifestyle perspective. So it all comes down to what you want from your overseas experience. Is it to go to London and travel and earn pretty good money, or is it just to go there to save money? Or is it just to go there to work on the biggest deals as you can, because that's what you love from being a lawyer? Just under the magic circle, we obviously have the silver circle. I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of these names because they're all based here as well. So the Ashurst, the HSF, the Norton Rose, Hogan Lovells, they make up the silver circle. Then you have the city law firms, which we've kind of classified here from a salary perspective, and the city law firms. So firms like CMS, Simmons, Taylor Weston, and Clyde & Co. They all tend to have a sector specialism. So you think of Taylor Weston, a lot of their clients, a very good private equity firm, very good corporate firm, but a lot of their clients are tech focused. If you look at Clyde & Co., it tends to be IT tech focused as well. They all are law firms that are basically situated and headquartered inside the City of London. And then you have firms that are just outside of the City of London, and we're talking about 50 meters outside. If you know London, it's a square mile. And you have firms like Stephenson Harwood, Charles Russell, Speechy, who I first worked when I first got there. What I should make clear is that every law firm in London and in the top 50 is a very big, sizable law firm. You've only got to look at number 49, which is Hill Dickinson, and they have 175 partners. So even if you're at the top 50th law firm in London, you're still working for a big law firm compared to Australian standards. It's pretty hard to look into that crystal ball now and advise whether that demand in the US law firm sector will return, particularly in London. Pre-COVID, Aussie lawyers traditionally went to the UK and joined the Magic Circle law firms for all the silver circles for a couple of years to try to step up into the US law firms. We very rarely placed people directly into those US law firms, but that all changed in 2021 and 22. So, is it going to come back? It's really hard to know from that perspective. So, if you are a non-transactional lawyer, really those silver circle city law firms that are full service law firms, sort of covering litigation, construction, TMT, employment, they're going to be the popular ones going forward for you. And look, traditionally, they've always been a really popular place for Aussie lawyers because it's that blend of competitive salaries, but also a better work-life balance. They are the law firms that have the Friday night drinks, they have the sports clubs, the netball teams, the rugby teams, and they're actually full of lawyers that can actually attend those because they're not sort of stuck on deals. So I guess the issue is there's that trade-off in salary. The salaries are much lower. And using that example there, you can see as that 1 year PQE lawyer, we're talking up to 150 grand, at least 50 grand less than the Magic Circle. So it's still good money from an Australian perspective, but there is that sort of trade-off for what you're looking to. So look, reverting back to that crystal ball, my advice at the moment is you've got to look at your personal circumstances of when you want to head over there. If you're under 3 years PQE and you're from a transactional background, you can dip your toe in the water in and out of it quite easily. If you're under 3 years PQE and you're not from a transactional background, I think I'm 100% advised to wait till you're sort of 3 years PQE to sort of looking to make a move. If you're over 3 years PQE and you want to move in 2020, then look, let's be active with your applications. I think you've got to be in there to do it. If your goal is 100% to be at a US law firm, look, maybe we should be having a discussion about joining a Magic Circle firm first or a Silver Circle first, because potentially you could spend another 18 months here where you could be getting 18 months experience in a Magic Circle firm. So again, there's a lot of personal circumstances that go into it. What I'd like to remind everyone is that, like, pre-COVID, I think 70% of the lawyers that we actually placed in the UK did not have a job when they left Australia. I think a lot of that was because people went traveling beforehand and weren't actually directly trying to go in there. But, we normally get people CV across and have interviews aligned for when they first arrive in the UK. So look, if I revert back to mine example, I know it was many years ago, but look, Taylor Root had 3 or 4 interviews arranged for me in my first week when I landed in London. And it took me about a month to get a job. So I kind of delivered some furniture for a couple of weeks, but I was very much in the process while I was traveling around Southeast Asia in terms of applying jobs. So, don't be afraid to kind of, get on a plane and get over there if that's what you really desire for, because, it is a big part of it. And I think a lot of employers are now kind of keen to meet people before they get in there, before they secure the job. So, but look, let's sit down and organize a plan from that point of view, because I know a lot of people would have heard of their colleagues with great relocation packages, and 100%, if you secure a job from Australia, you will get a relocation package. They'll normally pay for you and your partners flights over there. They're often economy and not business, I'm afraid to say. Look, they'll look after your visa and your visa application. They'll normally pay for 2 weeks or 1 month's accommodation, and in some cases there'll be sign-on bonuses. Just to touch base on the sign-on bonuses, I'm sure you've all heard about the huge sums that were on offer last year. Look, I'm afraid those days are truly well and gone. We're really seeing sign-on bonuses at the moment. There is some relocation sign-on bonuses, which can be $5,000-$10,000 just to help you move over there. But the big kind of sign-on bonuses that we were seeing have certainly diminished from that perspective. Just talking about UK visas, if you're lucky enough to have a British passport or an ancestry visa, you can obviously move to the UK with zero restrictions, and you can move between firms. If you obtain a role before you leave Australia, it's very likely that the law firm will get you what is called a Tier 2 working visa. This allows you to work in the UK for up to 2 years, and post that you can look at moving on to a longer-term visa. The law firm will sponsor you and cover all the costs of those arrangements, and then you'll get indefinite leave to remain. The last option, and I must say the most commonly used option, is the Tier 5 Youth Mobility Scheme, currently only available to lawyers under 30 years old, but hopefully pushing up to 35 years at some stage soon. This allows you to work in the UK unrestricted for 2 years. And now most employers will actually put you on the Tier 5 and then move you on to the Tier 2, just to prolong the visa requirements. So even if you're an Australian and you secure a job and the law firm says, look, can you come over in your Tier 5? It's just a faster route to getting it, and then they will work on your Tier 2 there. So don't worry too much about the visas sort of side of things. It's all generally taken care of from the law firms. In terms of qualifications, very different from the US market, which Sam will cover on off shortly. And Australian lawyers can easily move to the UK and register as a foreign lawyer. You don't have to become qualified in Australia. A lot of lawyers choose to, particularly ones that want to go in-house that are contentious. Some law firms will ask you to do it as part of your professional development, but it's not something you need to really worry about unless you're a contentious lawyer straight away. It's something you can worry about when you kind of move over into that market. But it's definitely different to the US. So I'll pass you over to Sam, who can talk a little bit more about the US market from that perspective. Cheers.
Thanks, Hayden. Just reverting back to the US, I mean, we can understand why so many Australian lawyers are excited about the prospect of securing a role there, I think particularly in New York. It's the largest and most profitable legal market in the world, and with that really comes an opportunity to accelerate your career and to distinguish yourselves from your peers when and if you decide to return home. The US legal market is really dominated by the elite US firms, which are headquartered in New York. These firms really set the pace for salaries across the country and for US firms across the globe. They're also the firms which are most likely to consider and to absorb Australian lawyers. And like the US firms in London, most of the demand for Aussie lawyers is focused on corporate and finance. New York is the financial epicenter of the world, and these groups really stand at the heart of the firm's transactions. They're also considered the most transferable practice groups across jurisdictions from a technical perspective as well. Thanks, Hayden. Without a doubt, remuneration is a major driver for people looking to move over to the US. So as you'll see in the slides there, with just 1 year of post-qualification experience, or perhaps 2 with a discount, you can earn up to $350,000, which is really the equivalent of what a junior salaried partner would be earning in Australia. The trade-off is, of course, long working hours, but experiences really do vary. And some Aussies have found that the hours are not too dissimilar to what is expected in really busy periods at top-tier Australian firms. So again, experiences really vary, and ultimately it does depend on who you speak with and their own personal experience. In terms of visa requirements, all of our clients have immigration services that will take care of your visa requirements, but it might be good for you to know that, it might be good for you to know that Australian lawyers are eligible for an E3 visa, which is a unique work visa made available, like you have a pet, made available exclusively to Australians working in the US in a professional capacity. So And from a qualification perspective, you'll need to be admitted to the Bar Association of the state in which you wish to practice. So if you wish to practice in New York, for example, you'll need to be admitted to the New York Bar. You can start and secure a role without being admitted to the bar, and our clients will help you with the bar exam application process, but you will need to sit the bar within a certain period of starting, and often that is reflected in your employment contract. As a rule, the bar exam is always administered on the last Tuesday and Wednesday of every February and July, so twice a year.
Thanks, Sam. Now, just quickly, why isn't that changing for me? Quickly cover off some of the other markets that we recruit Australian lawyers into. The one that's probably the most unknown for Australian lawyers is really the offshore market. I think it's a particularly good location for litigators. The most common offshore markets are definitely the Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, and Bermuda, all kind of in the Caribbean, kind of off Miami kind of area. The other ones are the Channel Islands, which are between the islands of Jersey and Guernsey, which are between France and the UK. In terms of geography, they're kind of about a 30-minute flight from London and Paris. For those that are seeking sun and surf, obviously the Caymans and Bermuda are great places. For those that are probably more looking as a step to London, I'd probably recommend more the Jersey and Guernsey sort of option. Both of them are zero tax environments. So they're a great place, particularly, as I said, for litigators, insolvency and trust lawyers as well. There's a lot of demand for banking and finance lawyers and funds lawyers, and some demand also for corporate and commercial. A lot of the corporate lawyers there, they actually end up doing some corporate funds work as well. So if you're interested in that transition, that goes a long way as well. One of the issues with the offshore environment is that you need a minimum of 3 years working experience to be considered. And that is particularly so in the Caymans and Bermuda. The Channel Islands, although it's preferred, they do have some flexibility on that. So if you're sort of 1 or 2 years PQE and looking for something a little bit different, then Cayman, the Jersey and Canary Islands could be of interest to you. Obviously, pretty good salaries in general in terms of those markets. The other one that we're doing, an increasing amount of movement to is the Middle East. Mostly that is to Abu Dhabi and Dubai, but increasingly Qatar. A lot of the roles that we're recruiting there have a projects or infrastructure flavor to them. So anyone that's touching oil and gas or renewables or anything like that, huge demand for lawyers in Dubai at the moment. Traditionally, we'd always place lawyers in Dubai coming back from London via Dubai, but because of just sort of the demand there at the moment, there's a real interest in anyone from Australia that's looking to go there. Obviously, a zero tax environment as well. Cost of living can be high. Obviously, if you've got a Middle Eastern language skill, it would also go an extremely long way in terms of obtaining you a role there as well. Then a bit closer to home, Singapore, always a compelling option for Australian lawyers. Really great high-profile global deals there on the lender and the sponsor side. It's also right nice and close to Australia, so you can get across to Bali and Thailand with your mates, but also Europe's only one flight away as well. So there's a lot of advantage that in terms of Singapore from that perspective. Great roles in Singapore across all practice groups, corporate, banking, capital markets, employment. But what I would say that anyone that has that M&A, mining, energy, projects focus, there's a lot of demand for you in Singapore at the moment. So a bit of an idea in terms of the salaries on offer there. Then on to Hong Kong, where I was for 8 years. Look, traditionally a huge IPO and also finance market, but increasingly private equity and restructuring. Look, it's the mecca of places to be with anything that touches China. And obviously, as we come out of COVID, there's been a lot of relaxing of the rules, and China's starting to really take off again. So you don't need the language skills as a common misconception with people moving to Hong Kong. Again, probably more in favor of the transactional banking practices, but we move a lot of sort of employment lawyers, a lot of litigators, or particularly restructuring lawyers, to Hong Kong. It's a great place to try to get some international arbitration experience before moving on. So, overall, I'd highly recommend Hong Kong. There's a good mixture of offshore law firms there that take a lot of Australian lawyers. So it's one of those jurisdictions which is a little bit different to the Caymans, but they have offshore lawyers there, and then the onshore firms and some really good international and local international law firms that you can kind of work for there as well. So good variety of workplace from that perspective. Look, thanks for joining us today. Look, in conclusion, we have a huge variety of options for you in terms of moving internationally. So we do recognise, it's a difficult process, particularly as the market's turned. It's not as buoyant as it is, but as I was saying earlier, it's all about your personal circumstances and when you want to move over there. And for us, it's all about tailoring that advice to you and making sure you get you a job when you arrive or soon after. I know it's a daunting prospect, but look, we're here to help from that perspective. The process can be anywhere between 2 and 8 months to get over there. So those interview processes tend to be about sort of around 4 to 5 weeks at the moment, potentially up to 2 months. They normally allow you about 3 months to move over there. So look, if you want to be there for summer, you kind of really need to be making some applications now. And that crystal ball in both London and New York, we're kind of anticipating a little bit of pickup September, October onwards. But maybe that could be moving into next year. So now we do have a question, so I'll quickly move to that. So it's an in-house lawyer looking to move to the UK. What's the market like for generalist in-house lawyers? Look, it's a question we always have. One of the things I would say is that the UK market doesn't like hiring lawyers directly from Australia. They will expect you to move over there yourself and get a position. Once you're on the ground there, it's really depends what your practice group is or what you've been focusing on. So if you're in-house doing tech, if you're in-house doing banking, employment, look, you'll get a job in a heartbeat, but it's probably more of a case of actually moving over there on your own accord. But look, give me a call and let's talk about it. I'm an in-house specialist, so it's a big part of from that perspective as well. Next question we've got is about contract roles. Do they pay well? What do they expect? So that's a really good question. So there's a huge market in the law firms from a contractual point of view. So a lot of the US law firms, a lot of the Magic Circle as well as Silver Circle will take on lawyers on a 6-month basis. Just to help with workflow. So it's a great way to actually get a lot of experience or UK experience. They will pay you the same wages as what a full-time associate gets there. So if you're at a US firm, you're getting paid exactly the same amount of money. If you're a contentious lawyer though, and you're moving there, normally what you do is start off at a regulator and spend 3 months getting some regulatory experience. Then you do sort of 3 months, 6 months at a international law firm, and then you probably get a perm job. So you can see how those contracts move on. Even getting there and doing, as you get on the ground while looking for a job, there's so much doc review you can do as well there, which is highly paid. A lot of that doc review is actually classified as legally qualified roles. So one of the joys of Taylor Root, we can get you on the ground, get you working in a contract role ASAP while you're looking for a permanent position. So excellent. Well, look, I think that's all the questions. So thank you so much for joining us. Again, we want to be telling that advice to you. So please get in touch with us and we'll do our best to help you out and get you over there. But thanks for joining. Have a great evening. Cheers.